Bureau, there's something for everyone. I'm Renata Yarbrough Sanders, and I'm very, very excited to present for you this morning. I'm going to get started because we are on a timeline. So as you've already seen, you're asked to please silence your electronic devices. Let me check mine. Yes. No audio or video recording, but you can take photos. So today my objectives are to give an introductory overview of the structure and purpose of the entity known as the Freedmen's Bureau. I will expose and explore various types of records created by the Freedmen's Bureau that are beneficial to genealogical research about ancestors of diverse backgrounds, and that's really what the focus of this talk is. And I encourage all researchers to explore records of the Freedmen's Bureau in seeking information about ancestors and the communities that they lived in. So we'll start off building some background information about the Bureau. So what exactly was the Freedmen's Bureau? First, you must know that the official name of the Bureau was the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. The Bureau was established by an act of Congress on March 3, 1865, as part of the U.S. War Department. And the Bureau was responsible for the management and supervision of all matters related to refugees, freedmen, and lands that were abandoned or seized during the Civil War. Originally, the Bureau was only planned to be a one-year thing, but it ended up being renewed twice, once in 1866 and then again in 1868 with some limited functions. And the Bureau was officially abolished in 1872. And I like to make sure people know that even though the actual Bureau was abolished in 1872, some of its functions did continue through the United States government. The original records of the Freedmen's Bureau can be found at NARA on microfilm record group 105. And there are also pre-Bureau records from what was called the Freedmen's Department for Mississippi and for Fort Monroe, Virginia. Now, the organization of the Freedmen's Bureau was just like any other government entity. There was a national headquarters in Washington, D.C., headed by a commissioner, and that commissioner for the full length of the Bureau's existence was General Oliver Otis Howard. General Howard was a Union officer who was known as the Christian general because what he had planned to do was go into the ministry after the war, but the government and the president had other plans for him. There's also state-level assistant commissioners that answer directly to or reported directly to General Howard on the circumstances and conditions in their individual states. And then kind of equal laterally to them, there were superintendents who headed up special departments for each state, like for education, medical, because there were hospitals, and legal, because the Freedmen's Bureau had its own court system. And then they had assistant superintendents that answered to them. There were also local field offices, which of course is where most of the work was being done, and these were headed by sub-assistant commissioners. Now, you can see here the states that you will find Freedmen's Bureau records for. They are available in M-numbered microfilm reels at NARA, but we will talk later about where else you can find them. And you can see that the states are Alabama, Arkansas, Washington, D.C., Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, and Delaware, which are together, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. The state with the fewest microfilm rolls is Florida, and the state with the most is Virginia. So you can see a big difference there between 15 rolls or 203 rolls, which kind of lets you know, as you're researching how likely you might be to find information about an ancestor or the community that they lived in. Now I want to talk about the name, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, and we'll talk first about the refugees. These were people who almost always were white people who had fled their normal place of residency during the Civil War. So you're going to find records about those ancestors of yours, well, likely. I can't guarantee anybody you're going to find any records, but you got to look for them. But so you want to look for those, and these would be white property owners who were escaping Union-occupied areas, or white Confederates who were doing what I call defecting, but the nice way of saying it is they sought safety in neutral areas from military operations going on around them. Okay, then the freedmen. Now the freedmen, that's who everybody knows about. That's who everybody thinks you're only gonna find in these records, and that's so far from true. These are persons, men and women, children, who had been formerly enslaved. You'll find them in the records referred to as freedmen, freed person, freed woman, colored, the abbreviations for colored, or Negro. And then you have the abandoned lands. So the Bureau had control over any lands that had been abandoned or confiscated in the South, and the Bureau was given authority to divide these lands into 40-acre plots and distribute them to freed blacks and white refugees loyal to the Union. So we all hear about the 40 acres and a mule. Unfortunately, along came President Andrew Johnson, who took this authority away from the Bureau and restored these properties to their original owners. So there's just a small group of people who did get this land and did not lose it. Now, the Bureau had so many functions that I could not possibly tell you about them all in this session, or probably in a whole day of Roots Tech. But they all would fall under one of these 6 categories: relief services, health care, land redistribution, judicial functions, labor relations, or education. So just to point out a few of the categories that we're going to focus on today, and that I would encourage you to look into, no matter who your ancestors are, but in particularly if you're researching persons who were not formally enslaved. So whatever category that falls under for you. You may find them in the reports of rations issued, transportation reports, persons and articles hired, Freedmen's Bureau labor contracts, registers of complaints. You really want to look there. Court cases, indentures, land and property records, letters of complaint. You want to look there, because that's basically the same thing as the registers of complaints. Reports of outrages and arrest, letters sent and received, which this is going to be hours and hours and days and nights of your life. And then never skip over miscellaneous reports. And I advise you to never skip over miscellaneous reports in anything that you're researching, because you'll find lots of gold there. Now, as I've mentioned, you will find, as expected, records related to formerly enslaved persons. However, and the reason we're here today, is to make sure you know that you are also going to find records about white people, poor and destitute white people, land and property owners, which before 1865 is almost completely gonna be white people, business owners, community members, community officials, and even people who worked for the Freedmen's Bureau. And I really encourage you to look there if you're missing an ancestor, because your ancestor could have been living in the North, but have been hired to work for the Bureau and spent time in South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, and you're wondering why your DNA matches are coming from there. Well, I always like to quote Shannon Combs Bennett. I don't know if she's in here, but I attended a workshop she gave one time, and it stuck with me that she said, men leave their presence, and you can spell it however you want to, everywhere they go. So I'm just gonna leave that at that. Okay, and one more thing before we get into the records. Each roll of microfilm has a descriptive pamphlet that was created by NARA, and these are absolutely wonderful. As I mentioned, every state has an M number. So the example here is for Virginia. I live in Virginia, but I don't research Virginia. And so the Virginia records are part of M1913. And you can see that these are for the state of Virginia. Each descriptive pamphlet will give you the history of the Bureau operations in that state, the organizational structure and division of duties for that state, the description of the records available for that state, the related records that you might find on other microfilm reels, and a table of contents that goes field office by every kind of office and tells you what you will find for that office. And so just to show you one example, and I know you probably can't really read that, but this is from Princess Anne County, Virginia, which is Virginia Beach, Virginia. And it's the second page, which is why you don't see a heading for it up here, but that's what you'll see. And I just wanted to point out a few things that the description of records available will tell you about just for this particular area. So if you look at the underlined areas, you'll see first leases and work agreements. Now remember, we're genealogists, so we're looking for names. So anything that's going to have names, and then it's a bonus if we get additional information with those names. So those are going to have names. The next one that I'm focusing on is the Register of Freedmen on Government Farms. Amazing names, information like their ages, sometimes family relationships are also there, like, so-and-so and their son or two siblings will be noted. So that information will also be there. You'll find complaints this is just for Princess Anne County, Virginia, and there'll be some contracts here to go through. So I'm just pointing out a few of the things that you would find in this. The records are not consistent from one place to the next. So you have to look and use this descriptive guide to help you know what you might find. This is what you find on the landing page on Family Search for the state of Virginia Freedmen's Bureau records. Now remember, they have more records than anyone else, so it's not going to look like this on every state's page. But this is just showing you all the different offices for Virginia, and then when you click on this, it opens up all the different kinds of records, and then you click on those and you're reading the records. So in Virginia, you'll see they always start with the descriptive pamphlet, so it's right there for you to click on. But Virginia also has, as I mentioned before, those pre-Bureau records from Fort Monroe. And they also include information about North Carolina freedmen. So a lot of people don't realize that, but northeastern North Carolina freedmen, or people who emancipated themselves during the war, they poured into Fort Monroe, Virginia. So they're in those records too. Okay. So now we're going to start looking at some of the different record types, and this is where I have to really watch my time. So the first type of record we're looking at are apprenticeship records. This is a category of records that the Bureau, or help that the Bureau gave, was helping to manage apprenticeships. A lot of times, these apprenticeships are going to connect a formerly enslaved child to a former enslaver. Now, you can't count on it, but it gives you a direction for your research. So on the screen here, this is from Tyrrell County, North Carolina. The first three that you see in the box are James, Jesse, and Joseph Bassnight. And you see that they are being apprenticed to Zachariah Pingleton. Now, let me just tell you that even though it doesn't tell you that Zachariah Pingleton is white, I promise you that if he weren't white, it would say colored or Negro or something like that. So you can assume that he's white. So if you descend from Zachariah Pingleton, Don't you want to know that he apprenticed these 3 little children? And don't you want to know why their mother, it was at the request of their mother that he apprenticed them? Don't you want to know what that connection is? Or why you might have bass nights on your DNA match list? Okay. So, the next one that's not in a box just is similar. You know, we've got 4 Jenkins children here, and in this case, they're being apprenticed to a man whose last name is Jenkins. So that's a pretty possible hint that this could be a former enslaver. But let me just, and I want to make sure you know something. Only about 15% of the time did formerly enslaved people take the surname of their last owner. But in a case like this, the war has just ended. The families haven't always decided yet what their surname is going to be. And so the people creating these records, they have to give a surname. They feel like they have to give a surname. So even if the family hasn't decided yet what they're going to call themselves, they may often just use the surname of the former owner. But then when you find them in 1870, they may have a different surname. In 1880, they might have a different surname for that, because these families are still figuring it out. They could take whatever surname they wanted. So just because you see it here, that doesn't mean that's going to be the surname moving forward. But anyway, you see the Jenkins, and then you see 3 Ellis children also being apprenticed to someone with the last name of Ellis. So this record is just as important to descendants of these white apprentice masters as it is to the descendants of the formerly enslaved children. Now, in this case, there's a letter from the Bureau, and it's from Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's being written from the Bureau to a Mr. Hall. We don't have his name. That's something for the researcher to find out. And this is highlighting a very common situation that happened where former enslavers tried to hold on to the children of the people they used to enslave. And so this letter says, Mr. Hall, it has been reported at this office that you're detaining a child named Elisha at your farm or plantation. Although this child has no parents living, the law does not give it to you unless you have it legally bound to you. The fact that you are the child's former master, ding, 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 for the descendants of the enslaved Elisha, does not entitle you to hold the child. And unless you can show some legal warrant for detaining the child, you must give the boy up at once to his grandfather, who is willing and able to take care of him. So I probably don't have to tell anybody in the room how important some of those hints are in this letter. But again, you would want to find out who Mr. Hall was and find out if that's your ancestor and try to understand what was going on with him at the time. You may have a picture of your ancestor with a little black boy in it, and you don't know who that little black boy is or why he's in the picture. This could help answer that, and then maybe you can connect with his descendants. Okay. We're also talking about records of persons and articles hired. Now, really, that just means that the Bureau rented something from somebody or hired someone to work for them in a particular location. So this is an example of what a state-level report would look like that's coming from the records that have been submitted to the state-level assistant commissioner from the sub-assistant commissioners around the state. This is reports of persons and articles employed and hired in the state of North Carolina during the month of September 1868, and this is one page of several. So I want to zoom in on what you're actually seeing here. So this is what's on the left side of the page. You're getting what was hired, so it's either going to be a person or something like a room or a building or an office or something like that, what it's being used for or what the person was hired for, information about the dates and the number of days and how much they were paid and that kind of thing. And then on the right-hand side, which is over here, you're also getting, and I kept the person's name or the item so you could see it, the very specific use of whatever that room is. So this is going to be used as a storeroom for bureau stores. This person is being hired as an office agent. Do you think he's black or white? Probably. You got to do the research, so it's not going to always tell you everything, but the office agent is probably not black or probably not formerly enslaved. But you have people helping to give out the rations. They could be black or white. Do the research, find them in the census, see who they were, what they were doing, and these are the different towns that they were doing the work in. And then you have a room here being used for an agent to use as his office. Those buildings, those rooms, those things are coming mostly from white people. So again, y'all are getting the point. I don't have to keep saying it, do I? Okay. So this house, for instance, it looks like a house, or maybe it could have been a schoolhouse, is what was rented out or hired as the Freedmen's Bureau office in Beaufort, South Carolina. So again, who owned that? Did your ancestor rent his home to the Freedmen's Bureau? You'll want to find out. This is a letter that was written in Texas from the Freedmen's Bureau office in Galveston, Texas. And this person, this Freedmen's Bureau worker, is asking for a name to be added to his list of persons and articles hired. And the person's name is Lindrum Armstrong. Oops, hit the wrong button. Lindrum Armstrong, and he's asking to add him. And the reason he's asking to add him is because he organized a school for freed children on the plantation of someone by the name of Horatio Hearn, which should have been doing something, but it's not. But you can see it right here. So again, I looked this man up. He was a very large enslaver, and so was his whole family. They owned hundreds of enslaved persons. So again, if you're researching him, you would want to know that he hired out this exact building that you're looking at right now on his plantation to be used as a schoolhouse for freed children. There it is right there. Okay, rations. This is a really big category. Rations were distributed to destitute freed persons and whites. You may find your ancestors' names on rations list, and they're typically going to be denoted by color if they're white, sometimes if they're either, but typically it'll be pointed out if you have a list full of black people and somebody happens to be white, or vice versa. So let's take a look here. This is from New Bern, North Carolina, and this is a rations list for 1866. And you can see here that you have the names of the heads of households or the person coming to pick up the rations. They give you the dates that the rations are meant to cover, and then they give you information about the family. Now, I know it's hard to see, but it's asking how many are in the family, how many are adults, how many are children, how many in total, and then it has this little category here that they're calling class. But what it says is white or colored. And if you look at the bottom where the totals are, there are 15 white and 17 colored. Hardly a difference at all. So your white ancestors may have been getting rations, and this will help you to understand what's going on with them at this time in history, in their history. And not only that, you get some extra information over here about the reason why they needed rations. Destitute, sickly, the whole family was sick, sick and destitute. So again, just informing that ancestral timeline. I need to go faster. Okay. This is another rations list. This is from Yorktown, Virginia. I found this one interesting because on this list, I noticed it said police, for these 6 men who are listed on the rations list. And so looking over to the side, I was like, why would the police? It says they're the police guard for a farm. So there were freedmen's farms. So this is a hint for those researching formerly enslaved ancestors in that area that they may want to see what this farm was and if they had ancestors on it, probably some of the names that are right there. But also, if your ancestor was working as a police guard on this farm, again, your ancestral timeline is being informed. Transportation. This was a really big category of records in the Freedmen's Bureau, but I used this particular photo behind it to let you know that you will often find these records or the hint of a record on a page that refers to all different types of records. They're not going to be neatly categorized for you where it's going to say, here are the records about transportation. So somewhere in here, there is a record that I'm about to show you, but there are also records here about rations and about letters and other things. So here's one of those squares from what you just saw, and this is a letter from Raleigh, North Carolina, going up through the Bureau requesting transportation for Judy Treadwell, a destitute freedwoman from Raleigh to Edenton, North Carolina. Now today, that's about 2 hours and 15 minutes in a car going 65, 70 miles an hour. But look at the information that you're getting here. She was brought away from there by her former master some years since, is now old and feeble and not able to do much for her own support. She has friends and relations in Edenton who will count it a pleasure to help maintain her. So again, you're seeing this transportation record, but you're getting location and family information along with it. White people also got transportation from the Bureau. So I have just the top of a letter showing here that's showing you that transportation was requested for 5 white persons, Henry Hicks, Betsy Cox, Daniel Ledwell, Alan Previtt, and John Bruce, for transportation for themselves and their families from Charlotte, North Carolina to Washington County, Texas. Again, I only knew my ancestors were in Texas. Why are my DNA matches in North Carolina? This is going to help you find out. And it tells you that they're destitute, they're fending at Charlotte, that they have family. Well, no, this one doesn't say family, but if they can get to Texas, then they won't become dependent on the government, which is the key. They'll do anything to keep people from becoming dependent on the government. So this is why they're going to get their transportation, I'm sure. And then this one is a transcription of a record that actually has about 240 names on it. I took just a quick snapshot of it to mention to you that people were also often transported in very large groups because you had, it happened everywhere, but especially in the Deep South, where you had these large plantations and the freed persons that used to work the plantations were gone. These planters needed someone to do their labor. So they often put out advertisement through the Freedmen's Bureau looking for people willing to move there and work for them on their farms and plantations, and then the Bureau would provide that transportation. And so that's what happened here on this list of freed persons to be transported from Charlotte, North Carolina to Brownsville, Tennessee, who've contracted with none other but James Bond, Jr. And you can see that you have family groups here informing your genealogy research. So not only are you going to want to know this because you're connected to James Bond, Jr., but you're also seeing a man, his wife, his son, his daughter, another son, and then 3 more children under 12 and over 4, and that's a family group, and you see that throughout this whole record. All right, outrages or complaints. This set we're looking at in particular is outrages of whites against blacks. And we see here from Plymouth, North Carolina, that we have a case where Rosetta Smith, stated to be colored, is making a complaint against Benjamin Hassel, who is white, that Benjamin Hassel did beat her with a club, and then he choked her. Yes, it's horrible to read, but it has great value for us as we're trying to learn about our families. So sometimes these would be handled in the Freedmen's Court. If not, it's passed on to the county courts, which lets you know you can find county court records. And in this case, it was referred to the county attorney for Tyrrell County, North Carolina, so you'll want to look for those records there. And similarly, Isaac Kane made a complaint against Pollard Hodge and Needham Hyman that the said Hodge and Hyman did beat Isaac Kane, and when he escaped from them, they fired a gun at him 3 different times. This one was also referred to the Martin County, North Carolina court, so you want to look there for the records. Now, I mentioned several times that the Freedmen's Bureau had its own courts, and so you will find records just like this, just as if it's a regular county court record of someone being summoned to the Freedmen's Bureau office or to the Freedmen's Bureau for a court hearing. So here in June of 1867, Mr. James Page has failed to come forward to answer to a report of abuse of a freed person, Madison Peoples, and he's being given one final chance to come in on his own. But then on the same date, a formal summons was made for Mr. Page to answer these complaints of abuse of several different freed people, and he's given a date to appear at the Freedmen's Court on July 8th. And that was from Texas. Now, contracts is a really big area of Freedmen's Bureau records. Labor contracts, as I mentioned before, people still needed somebody to work on their farms. And in many cases, they were hiring people who had been formerly enslaved to them, but that's not always the case. So that's an area of focus for people doing enslaved ancestral research. But again, if you're more interested in the enslaver, you're finding out, just like you would want to find a store register from your ancestor's store, or plantation records showing how much wheat or corn or whatever he brought in that year, you would want to know if he hired people to work for him and how he was handling and conducting that business. So this particular letter document is a copy of an agreement between DeMatteis Walton and Pleasant Coles, and it's saying that Mrs. Walton, she's a female, agrees to allow Pleasant Coles to work her farm for 1 year from Christmas next, and that he will receive 1/4 part of whatsoever wheat, rye, or oats he may raise, and the remaining 3/4 will be furnished to Mrs. Walton. And the same would be true of corn, potatoes, garden vegetables, as well as fruit. He will furnish the seeds, and she will furnish quarters or housing for him, his brother Andrew, genealogy, and his mother Mary, genealogy, and that they be disturbed by no act of hers or her assigns, which is really nice because you don't often see that. You don't always see that. Labor contracts can be on a pre-printed form, and so you just want to look for the genealogically relevant information. And here we have Susan Perkins, who's going to provide services of being a cook, washer, and house servant for William McGee here. And it will give the terms, the date, the pay. She's going to make $3 a month for 5 months. And then this is another labor contract, and I'm just kind of trying to show you how different these can be, because I told you nothing's consistent, and it's not. This one has some of the terms that you're more likely to see, that the freed persons are going to make an agreement to do all the kinds of labor common to the farms of the county, to work faithfully and be respectful in their deportment, and that if they don't show up, they lose their wages, and the same would be true if they're idle. They will not be paid. This one did have a kind of what I thought was unique clause. I've seen a lot of these, and I haven't often seen this clause that at the very end of it, it says, he will treat them kindly and encourage the establishment of schools for their children. So wouldn't you want to know if your ancestor did that or not? All right, letters sent and received. There are hundreds of thousands of these in the Bureau records on every topic. So the only thing I can do is tell you to read through them. Go on Family Search, go to the catalog, look for the location of your interest, and read through everything. This is a letter, you know, I had someone tell me that I met last night. I don't know if she's in here, but she said my ancestors were all from the North, so we didn't have anything to do, you know, they're not going to be in the Bureau records. So I like to show this one because this is an agreement, well, it's not an agreement, it's a complaint regarding L.D. Fuller and some freedmen, and this is from Texas. But L.D. Fuller was a New York man who rented the land in Texas from someone named James Bentley and then hired and did a freedman's contract with several freed persons to work that land for him while he just sat in New York and raked in the money. And that's not really uncommon. So don't think you won't find your northern ancestors in these records, because you just might. This is a series of letters. This is one letter, but it's from a series of letters that I have on my blog. And it's from William Eaton of Franklin County, North Carolina. And he is writing feverishly to the Bureau about the conditions of the freedmen in Lewisburg. Well, this is where most of my paternal family is from. And in his very first letter, which was written in August of 1865, he has this section in the red box where he's talking all about the freed persons who were previously owned by someone named A.E. Yarborough. And I know her name is Aret E. Yarborough. She was my great-grandfather's fourth and last owner. He is not mentioned in here, but everything about this paragraph that I'm showing you is about her formerly enslaved people, so it's talking about him without saying his name. So this gave me information about what my ancestors' circumstances were at this time. If you descended from William Eaton, you would want to read through these letters because his first letter focuses on her and kind of what's going on around, but as you go through the series, he's talking about himself more, his own situation, his own plantation, and what's happening on his land. And all the way until 1868, if you can see that date squeezed in the corner, he's still writing to the Bureau about this, and I have the series on my blog. And you notice here that in this communication, they're saying that William A. Eaton of Lewisburg, this is now going all the way up to General Howard, and he has about 70 freedmen, women, and children on his own farm. So this is something for you if you're researching William Eaton. Okay, that last category of records that is covered in the name of the Bureau, these records are about the restoration of abandoned lands, but it's not just abandoned lands, it's also property of other kind. So this is where you're going to find your white ancestors almost exclusively. So I have just a few examples I'm going to point out from this example here. So this is Louisa J. Gale, and she is putting in an application to be restored the ownership of her house situated in Norfolk, Virginia, also the furniture in the house belonging to her and her sister, E.A. Davis, the property now being in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau. So this is information for anybody researching Louisa Gale and getting a connection, a name of a sister. This next one is for John Caffey or Coffey. He's applying for the ownership of a mule that was taken by some of our troops, Union troops, while on a raid through the county of Princess Anne, Virginia, which was Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this one, Thomas Kofer is applying for the restoration of ownership of certain furniture, now in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau. A lot of you have furniture that's been passed down in your family for a couple of hundred years. What if you were to find out that that piece of furniture, that desk or that table, was used by the Freedmen's Bureau in the delegation of its duties? I just think that's special. What I also like to point out here is we also often have a deficit when it comes to finding records of our female ancestors, black, white, green, or yellow. On this example that I'm showing you, out of the 8 people named, 3 of them are females. They're white females. So this would be a great place to look for your ancestors during the Reconstruction period. All right, how do we find these records? Well, I'm going to tell you, they are so easily accessible now, and you have so many options to, find out what works for you. So the 5 that I'm going to talk about, plus 1, Family Search, of course. You can access these records directly through discoverfreedmen.org. Family Search has digitized pretty much all of the records except for a few roles that are at the national headquarters level, and many of them have been indexed, but it's not a complete indexing, and none of these are a complete indexing, but I encourage you not to depend on an index for anything because people transcribe things incorrectly, or the spelling may have been incorrect on the record, and so the way you search for it, it might not come up. So I just encourage reading through the records on all of these. Ancestry.com/Freedmen. They also have digitized 3.5 million records, and that includes records of the Freedmen's Bank, which is not the same thing as the Freedmen's Bureau. So please be aware of that. They claim them to be fully indexed, but again, I say do not depend on that. Use their index, do a search, but then be diligent and go over to Family Search and read through the records. NARA.gov, which of course is where the actual microfilms are housed, they, along with these next 3, have a crowdsourced effort going on to transcribe, do full transcriptions of the records. So you can go on their websites, as well as the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and SOVA, the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archives, all have these online, and you can go in and help to transcribe them, full transcriptions. And then, a site I like to talk about, and I'm honored that one of the creators of the site has actually reached out to me and thanked me for having this in my talk. 2 of our Gen friends, Angela Walton Raji and Tony Carrier, several years ago, created a site called Mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. If you go onto this site, you'll see the options you have across the top. Those descriptive pamphlets that I talked to you about are right here where it says research guides. They have them for all the states, and then you can click into them directly from that. But the site features a map of the whole United States, and it has little icons where any Freedmen's Bureau office, hospital, or school was located. You click on that location, and you spread the map out and click on that location of where you're interested, and then it will give you the link to go directly into the records for that location. So I highly encourage you to visit Mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. Maybe it's not going to work for you, but you have basically 6 options for how you want to dig into these records. So I've never done this presentation this fast. I was proud of myself. Okay, so to recap, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, also known as the Freedmen's Bureau, was created in 1865 to assist and supervise all matters related to freedmen, refugees, and property abandoned or confiscated during the Civil War. The Bureau records inform us of circumstances and activities that occurred during the Reconstruction period in the United States, and records of the Freedmen's Bureau are accessible online and can be useful for all researchers who had ancestors in America during these years. The Bureau was established in 1872, but as I mentioned, there are some records of activities that continue to occur through the Negro Affairs, I think is what it was called, department of the United States government. And since I finished so early, I'm going to tell you about, I took some slides out because I was so worried about my time. I guess I didn't need to be. But there's one slide I took out that I do want to tell you about, and that's something that I found fairly recently. It was for Accomack County, Virginia, which is on the eastern shore. Within the Bureau records, and the section is called Drummondtown, Virginia. So within the records for Drummondtown, Virginia, there is a census for 1865. It's a colored census and a white census. Two separate censuses, but they're part of the same record. And so, you know, we're always looking for things between the federal census years to find our ancestors. The census gives the names, the ages, the occupations of the white people, the colored people, but then it has a remarks section, and it tells you so many important details about the remarks section is not on the one for the black people, but for the white people, it gives you all these, it'll tell you if they were sick, it'll tell you if they're away, it'll tell you all kinds of really juicy information. So I encourage you, if you have any connection to Accomack County, that you take a look at that. But I say that because you never know what you're going to find in these records. Virginia is just amazing. I wish I had Virginia ancestors. But also, I was looking at Louisiana the other day, and I have no research there, so I hadn't really looked into the Bureau records, but we have an expert on it right here, Bernice Bennett. I was amazed at what I saw in the records for Louisiana. So, you know, you might just want to dig in and just read, just to kind of see some of the things that were happening that you may not have been aware of. And so with that, I will ask you to please remember to give feedback in the app. Find this session on the Roots Tech mobile app, scroll down to fill out the survey, and let us know what you thought of this session. And I thank you so much. These are the ways that you can contact me. And just thank you for being here. And if you'll hold still for just a minute, I want to take a selfie with you. So thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. All right, this is going to be a hard one. I might have to do it as a video. Let me see. Do what? Oh, I know I look like I know how to do stuff, but I don't. So I'm going to do it as video. Nope, got to turn that around. I'm glad I have all this extra time. Have you stopped the recording? All right, everybody say Freedmen's Bureau. All right, thank you. So I guess I have a few minutes if there are any questions. We have 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Yes? You have to look everywhere. And they did say they wanted you to use the mics for this one because it's being recorded. So there are mics if you have questions that you can go up to. But you have to look everywhere. You just never know. They could live in Fauquier, but be closer to Albemarle, to the office in Albemarle. And so, you know, they're probably walking or on a horse or something. So you want to look at all the surrounding areas. And if you use the search function, I would search widely. Like, I would search the whole state and then look at what comes up. But then when it comes to reading through or browsing, as they call the records, I would browse that location completely. Yes, ma'am. Don't make it hard.
Your presentation was wonderful.
Thank you.
And with the labor contracts, I just wanted to highlight that with a lot of them, it was like enslaving the people all over again. Because at the end, when you went to sell it, they would say, well, I fed you, I clothed you, you know, I housed you, and they wouldn't get anything. So it's like labor contracts, it's like a joke to even call that in some instances.
but what that did was generated complaints. And so you would want to then look at the letters of complaints because the freed persons may put in a complaint that they weren't being paid according to the agreement. You'll find a lot of those. But thank you for that, Janice.
The Freedmen's Bureau records, I learned a lot from you today because, I know a certain part of it, but to me, it's like you opened up a whole new world with all these
Well, wonderful.
categories of it that I have not looked at.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Yes. Dante. Oh, and then, okay, yes, okay, sorry.
So, Renata, awesome.
Thank you.
And I encourage anyone to check her out online. Also, Ms. Bernice Bennett here, two phenomenal individuals, huge in the genealogy community. In response to the lady that asked about to serve, for example, I ran into where I was looking for ancestors in Alabama. So I was looking at Montgomery and the Birmingham offices. They were not in there. They were actually in the Mississippi office because the counties were closer in that area. So check, as Renata said, check everywhere.
Everywhere.
For your ancestors.
And I can't believe I made it through a presentation without saying this, because if you go online and see any of my presentations, you will hear me say this again and again. Read every single thing from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, from corner to corner and side to side. Don't skip over anything. And ma'am, yes, I was gonna say the lady in the black sweater, which I have these lights in my eyes, so I can't really see who you are.
Okay, no problem. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that only a small percentage of the enslaved kept their last name.
Yes.
So how are you able to find, once you find them on the plantation, in the Freedmen's Bureau, and then to move on, how do we identify how they changed their name and when they changed it?
So you just have to really look for a corroboration of records so that you know you're looking at the same person. Now that's if you're like me and you knew nothing. I knew nothing about my ancestors beyond my two grandmothers, nothing at all. So, you'll see, in my case, Calvin, and I watched this Calvin move through 4 different owners with other information that I had about that family. So you're researching the whole family of who you suspect to have been the enslaver. Or if you know to be the enslaver, you need to know who his parents were, who his children were, who his siblings were, who his aunts and uncles were, and watch how their human chattel was moved between these family members through deaths or deeds of gifts or marriages and that kind of thing. So it's really about, it's trial and error, and you have to have the hypotheses and then try to prove it, and if it doesn't come true, then you have to look for it another way. It's just a lot of hard work, but if you have some oral history or something that's been passed down in your family to guide you, unlike me, then that should help to steer you. But it's not quick and easy. Please don't believe the TV shows. It doesn't happen in 3 minutes, 3 days, or often in even 3 years. You just have to track it. And if you have a Legacy Family Tree webinars account, which is on sale for Roots Tech till Saturday for 50% off, so you get it for $24.99 for an entire year, I have a talk on there called Finding Calvin, and it will show you how I found him. First discovered that he was enslaved at all, and then how I found his 4 different owners. So I encourage you to go in and take a look at that, as well as the many other webinars that are on there that will teach you how to do slave ancestral research. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to rest my feet.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for being
I just want
here.
to say something to the person that said, well, suppose they changed their names. Well, I did find my ancestor in Louisiana on a labor contract in 1868 with his mother and his siblings. That was 1868. I could not find him in the 1870 census, but I did have the names, and so I did a first name search.
Absolutely.
Because he was in the 1870 census as Johnson, but its name was actually Clark. Because of the labor contracts, I was able to find the marriage, what they call,
Cohabitation.
no.
Oh.
It was the marriage bonds,
Oh.
matrimonial bonds for each of his siblings. And thank goodness I had that labor contract, because I would not have known the names of those siblings. And to this date, I have connected with every single sibling's descendant, thanks to the labor contracts.
Thank you for that, Bernice. We have a set of experts sitting over here, so, I'm just one pea in the pod here, so thank you, Bernice. Yes, first name searches are exactly the way to go, and then, like I was saying, kind of corroborating, so you see these same people together, but with a different last name. That's part of the clue that you would want to follow.
When we encounter the names of enslaved persons in wills, what is the best way to make that fully accessible to anyone that is searching?
So I had a lady that came up to me before the talk and gave her a really long answer that I can't give you right now, but basically what you want to do is get it out in as many forums as possible, especially online, so that people can find it. People who are looking for those names can find it. So I suggest, if you don't have a blog, that you start one just for this purpose, that if you're on Facebook, or if you're not, get on Facebook. There are groups for the different locations. There are also several African American genealogy groups that lots of people post this kind of information to. Try to get it to your local historical society, to any genealogical groups in your area who may agree to digitize and get it, put it onto their websites for you. There's just a whole array of things you can do, but the key is that you want as many eyes to find it as possible. And make sure, if you do put it online, that you also put in the right keywords for people to find them by. There are also some larger projects going on right now, enslaved.org. There's also a project by American Ancestors that's very new called 10 Million Names. There are Family Search will also take your records. So just everywhere. And Janice wants to add to that. Beyond Kin.
Is the .org? BeyondKin.org is a site where you can upload your information, and if you don't want to put your contact information, you don't have to. What we're looking for is the information. So Beyond Kin is an amazing project, and you can add that to the list that Renata gave you as well.
Yes. We have 2
And
minutes.
to echo that, and to anyone, please share that information. Oftentimes, we run into a lot of whites that feel shamed or don't want to share or don't want to feel like they're a target, and don't want to answer because their ancestor, formerly enslaved our ancestors. But by all means, please share.
Yes.
3 words that I live by in genealogy: collaboration, communication, and support. So by all means, in whatever medium, share.
Yes, and I give a talk on that too. And so if you're interested, it's called It Takes a Village. It's called Researching Enslaved Ancestors, It Takes a Village. And there I spend 50 minutes talking about what you can do. So if you're interested, please reach out to me about that discussion. Okay, 1 minute. Yes.
Thank you for such a great talk. This has been fantastic. Hopefully you might be able to give me a little direction. I've discovered that I have some cousins in South Carolina who are mulatto, or that's how they were listed. My great-grandfather, who was white, was an officer in the Freedmen's Bureau in Beaufort, South Carolina. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions as to how I could use that information to further my discoveries and find a connection.
Before I answer you, I just want to take 15 seconds to thank everybody for being here today, and your questions have enlightened the conversation. So thank you, and thank you to Roots Tech for having me to give this talk today. Okay. So to answer your question, this is why I suggest